I'm Troy Kirby with a quick look at the 2022 Washington State Legislative Session. During the 2022 Washington State Legislature, lawmakers worked to prohibit the usage of active shooter drills, including conducting lockdown drills by schools, which would include simulations of or reenactments of active shooter scenarios in Substitute House Bill 1941. The House floor debated the bill on February 9th.
I think we can all agree that our school safety statutes have been really effective in preparing our kids for all kinds of emergencies. And this bill just seeks to add some words about active shooter drills. And it was brought to me by concerned parents in my community that active shooter drills scenarios could cause anxiety and perhaps more pressure on our kids than they need.
I think we've had some experience with some folks that we've talked to about folks that actually do the active training for schools. And they find that there's already adequate procedures in place for the kids that don't want to do the active training and the kids that do. And so they have to get permission slips from their parents in order to do those trainings. So we don't think this is a necessary thing because we think there's adequate procedures in place for those kids that don't want to go through this training, and the parents can make those decisions about those kids.
The bill was passed by the House on February 9th by a vote of 69-27, and then was debated over in the Senate on March 2nd.
It's really hard for me to even talk about this, that this is a bill for our times. This is about active shooter drills in schools. We all have safety drills for fire drills. We've been through those, in our education as well. But now we're talking about drills that mimic what happens when there is an active shooter in the school. Unfortunately, in some cases, we've had drills where they are actually firing off shots in school, in elementary schools, so that children are hearing the sound of people running around shooting guns. And very frankly, it is traumatic. Drills are important, but when they're not done well and recognizing the age of the students appropriately, et cetera, they really can cause harm. So what this bill does, it prevents or prohibits school lockdown drills from including live simulations or reenactments of active shooter scenarios.
I wanted to clarify that the bill does not, as Senator Wallman had mentioned, it doesn't prohibit lockdown drills. It just prohibits the live simulations and the reenactments of these active shooters as part of those drills. And so for that reason, I'll be supporting it. But I do want to mention, Mr. President, that this particular bill did receive, I believe it was 27 no votes in the House. There could be some members on our side of the aisle that support the idea of having the simulation drills being more similar to real life events so that students can be better protected in the case of these awful incidents that could occur in the schools.
Does anybody remember the phrase Castro, Cuba, communism, and then a nuclear bomb going off on TV? And being in school, I can't remember what grade, third or fourth grade, and having an alarm go off and the teacher yell, "Get under your desks," and cower underneath your desk in case of a nuclear attack. Those were the kinds of things that we did in that time because it was relevant.
I just want the body to stop and reflect on the fact that we are wanting to normalize active shooter drills in schools. Rather than working to try and stop that from happening in the first place, rather than working to get to the point where they don't have to have active shooter drills. Senator Fortunato said something about, what we grew up with. Yeah, I hid under the desk too, but I had no concept of what a nuclear bomb could actually do. That was outside my, 6-year-old brain at the time.
We all thought it was kind of fun to line up and go out of the building. We never had a fire, but we were prepared. What I'm rising to discuss is over 25 years ago, I watched a school shooting play out from across the street. That school was a middle school in Moses Lake, across the street from my office building. I had parents in my building whose children were in that school. I watched children run all different directions because there was an active shooter. We had students that lost their lives, were injured, a teacher who lost her life, and it was very, very traumatic. It still, even after 25 years, impacts our community for those families who were part of both sides of that shooting.
I really appreciate the intent of this bill. However, I have participated in drills that are described in the bill in our own school. In fact, I played a role, and I'm not sure if there's a real problem out there that's being addressed. These are not unannounced drills.
I just feel the need to stand and speak to this amendment, or speak to this bill, and just say in committee, we heard from young people themselves about what experience this created for them and what it brought to them while they were going through it and what they remembered and were able to share with us after the event.
I listened to suggestions on more assaults on our Second Amendment like we had last night that would do absolutely no good in this situation. And I've struggled today with how I might vote. But Mr. President, there are over 290 school districts in this state. You wouldn't have the same drill in Bellevue that you have in Benge. And when you look at that difference, your community's different than mine. How would we respond? Well, let's let the local school districts decide and not legislate it from Olympia.
Nobody wants to see an active shooter anywhere in our country, anywhere in the world. But it does happen, and I don't think we can pretend it doesn't happen. And so then the question is, what is the best way to prepare our students to deal with this?
I think about nobody wants to normalize a tragedy like this. Nobody wants to normalize active shooters, but the fact is, it's a fact of life these days. Schools are very vulnerable because they have very little ability to push back. So you've got to train them what to do. And that's my concern here, is that if we do the training in a good way, in an educational way, it will empower these kids.
Lockdown drills may not include live simulations of reenactment of active shooter scenarios that are not trauma-informed and age and developmentally appropriate. This bill, and we don't always choose the title of our bills. I think this bill, we all can agree on, probably has a pretty poor title compared to what it actually does. It does not prohibit active shooter drills in schools. It just says they have to be trauma and age-related appropriate. I think on both sides of the aisle here, we've heard some inconsistencies about what the drill or what the bill actually does or is proposed to do.
The bill was passed by the Senate on March 2nd by a vote of 30-18, and then went to the governor's office and was signed into law on March 17th.
In schools, unless the drill is trauma-informed and is age-appropriate and developmentally appropriate for the students. While safety drills are important, active shooter drills can cause harm if conducted poorly. The bill helps schools prepare, not scare, students on what to do in an emergency. Led by Representative Whalen.
Thank you for watching the 2022 Washington State Legislative Session.